The Point of View is brought to you by Cowbell Coffee. Cowbell Coffee. Taste it, love it. Kel Charcoal Toothpaste. Kel Charcoal. Happy smile. Bell Aqua Active. Bell Aqua Active. Stay true to originality.
Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. Here on The Point of View, we pick the right topics, get the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. And tonight is a continuation of a series we've been doing. We started off looking at a preview of the year 2022, where we looked at Ghana's politics. We're taking it global this evening. We're looking at the world in 2022. What are the key coordinates that have to be set globally? What's going to happen in the US? Where is China's role? What about Europe post-Brexit? We'll also come and look at the African continent and the key areas to look at, and finally look at Ghana and West Africa and what to expect. My guest is the founding partner of one of the largest law firms on the continent in terms of their spread across. David Ofosu-Dorte, AB and David, they have footprints in about 6 or 7 African countries directly and over 20 countries indirectly. He'll give us his view into the crystal ball for the world when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. So many people are now very interested in what's going to happen, not just in our country, but in the world. 2020 was an outlier of a year. COVID-19 came and disrupted the world. And it appears 2021 followed suit. The pandemic is still the biggest global issue. Now, with many people thinking the pandemic was over, the Omicron variant came to us in the latter parts of the year 2021 and seems to still be dominating parts of the news in 2022. But what kind of year will this year be? What will be the key issues driving world geopolitics? What will the power play between China and US look like? Where will the EU be in all this? What about Africa? Where is our place in the world as nations strive to control not just the pandemic, but the narrative of the world? We'll also talk about elections in Africa. 2022 will have a few elections. What would they mean? Which is the most important? What about ECOWAS? They made a decision about Mali a few days ago. How serious will these regional blocs become? Then the much talked about Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AFTA. Has it delayed, or are we still getting ready for an African economic boom? All of these with David Ofosu-Dorte. David, good to have you again. Good evening.
Good evening, Bernard.
I need to congratulate you on your company, because I feel your tentacles in Africa are growing. Tell me a bit about where the AB and David footprint is in the continent.
Well, currently, for the full member firms in the Pan-African practice, we are in Mauritius, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda, and then an affiliate firm in Kenya. And then, so that's the first aspect of the practice. And the second aspect is the 24 network of best friends that enables us assist clients in up to 30 countries.
Why is it important for law firms to work with each other in this Pan-African sense? Not just the fact that there are about 6 countries where they are direct relationships, but the partner firms. Why is this mindset for business important?
You see, there are only few people or few businesses outside Africa who see Africa in their individual countries. They tend to see Africa as if it's one country, particularly China and countries to the east. Even for countries to the west, even though they may be looking at the individual countries, they look at the bigger, Pan-African essence in terms of, doing business. And therefore, if you are a business on the continent, you have 2 choices, either to stay local or to go at the regional level. And at the end of the day, if people are investing in multi-countries, which is one of the things you need to be looking out for 2022, actually, there is going to be a lot of multi-country investments across Africa. The only way you can meaningfully assist investors is to collaborate with other people in other countries and give them a one-stop shop. Otherwise, remember that investors are going to be dealing in 55 countries, and that's quite a significant burden for the investor.
So the big investors don't want to just do Ghana. They'll typically like a network. They want Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Kenya. If they can get that, if they can get a project going together, they will feel it's better use of their money.
If you have a continent of 1.2 billion people, why do you want to deal with only 30 million people? Or even 300 million people for that matter. You want to take advantage, especially a continent of a growing middle class. It's important that you tap into the larger market. So
we'll come back to the Africa question, and I'll let you point out your ones to watch, as you usually do. Again, as way of intro, every first part of a year, you do the crystal ball, which brings people from all over the continent, and you typically do predictions. Are you going to do the crystal ball again this year?
Yeah, we are doing it this time in February. Okay. The date will be announced shortly. And the predictions for crystal ball, as you know, we reserve it for crystal ball.
I get it.
Yeah, but it's going to be largely virtual.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. So what are you looking out for in this year? What are the key trends you are analyzing for the world in 2022?
Again, I do this first, so there are two parts of it. There is the hobby part, which leads to the predictions, and then there is the business part. The business part, you need to be very much aware as to what is going on around you and its impact on what you do, even when you are advising clients, especially if you're a business law firm. So you are not advising clients purely on the legalese, but taking into context the business goal that they want to achieve. And therefore, you will need to understand what is going on globally. I've already taken a scan at the world, the global scene, and I'm continuously taking that scan at the global scene. So it comes from elections in Europe, like France, where Macron will kill, which is likely, but with a very challenging legislature, even if he does win. But as usual, he will have a challenge from the far right. And these are not yet the predictions. I'm just giving you what I'm looking at. So that's one example.
So a key issue in Europe this year will be the French election.
Yes, definitely. I mean, with UK going out of the EU and the Brexit implications, France and Germany, of course, Germany being the far dominant economy, is going to be significant. Then the next one I was going to talk about is Germany, because remember, for the first time in 16 or so years, we are going to have Germany without Merkel. And these things do have impact on Africa, I mean, whether you like it or not. Remember, Merkel drove the quote-unquote Africa Marshall Plan, I mean, which is driven by Germany and the EU. Will Olaf, in her absence, maintain it? These are things you need to watch and monitor. So we have France. Germany has just had a new government. And then one country that people don't talk about, but which is very, very influential in Africa, is Turkey. Turkey's election is in 2023, not 2022. However, what happens in 2022 will have an effect on 2023. I still don't see much significant challenge to Erdogan, the president of Turkey. So looking at it from that Europe, I'll just pick this for now. And then I'll move straight to the Far East. I'm looking at the global trend. I think the most significant one, and again, I must say that I look at these things always with Africa mirror in mind, Africa lenses, I mean, in mind. The most significant one for me is the RCEP, which is not much talked about. I'm sure you are aware about what the RCEP is.
Remind us.
That is the Regional Economic Partnership Agreement, which brings 15 Asian countries together. And this may surprise many. The AFCFTA is only the largest trading bloc if you count the number of countries involved. But the RCEP is the largest trading bloc if you count in terms of the volume of trade which is likely, I mean, to happen within the bloc. And that is bigger than even the bloc that is between China, Mexico, US, Mexico, and Canada. Yeah. So that's a significant bloc. And why that is of...
So these are 15 countries?
Yes, 15 countries, and driven by China, of course. And for the first time, you have China and Japan in one trading bloc.
So population-wise as well, it's probably the largest trading bloc in the world.
It is by far. What is significant about it in relation to Africa is that it happened so quickly when the AFCFTA had happened quickly and we expected it to take off, but we didn't quite take off. I mean, they promised to start on January 1st, 2022, and they have. I mean, first day of trading was over 10 million worth of goods moving from China to Indonesia.
And for viewers, let me just give them a quick overview. So RCEP is a regional comprehensive economic partnership
agreement, yeah.
Asia Pacific nations, Australia, Brunei, Cambodia, China, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, which is Burma, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. These 15 countries account for 30% of the world's population and 30% of global GDP, making it the largest trade bloc in history. And
just like the AFCFTA, they are liberalizing 90% of their goods, and the speed with which they are moving, it will not de-emphasize the AFCFTA for Africa, but it kind of shifts attention as to where you want to implement your multi-country investments if you were coming from the East. So that's one of the things that we need to be looking at. Singapore is one area to look at, just because there's always been that, as it were, fight for tourism and investment between Singapore and Hong Kong. Is going to continue, especially with China tightening some of the rules around Hong Kong. But I don't think much will change. And then let's talk about U.S.
Before that, one of the key issues with RCEP is that India did not join. And some people feel it's a bit like UK and Brexit. I don't know what your predictions are about India, because we know they have a charismatic leader. India, in fact, there's a book one of my lecturers wrote when I was in Warwick called Chindia Rising. His idea was that India and China together was going to redefine global politics. But with RCEP, it looks like India has chosen a different path. What should we look out for in that space?
I won't rule out the possibility of India joining, but that would be a much later issue. I think the critical thing is China and Japan. That's the one I find much more interesting. Incidentally, India and China are cooperating on many other issues. I mean, many other issues. But when you find China and Japan in one trading bloc,
because of their history, the Japanese occupation of China, and the rivalry over the South China Sea,
is still there. I mean, I had the ambassador of occasion to have a chat with one of the ambassadors of one of the two countries, and he told me about a funny thing where a public servant in an African country went to that ambassador looking for funding to attend a project in another country. Can you imagine? I mean,
he didn't even get the sense of the contradiction.
Yes, he didn't get the sense of the contradiction. So that's an area to watch. But specifically on China, one area to watch is the flow of investments. Again, it seems to have gone unnoticed that China now attracts more foreign direct investments than the USA. It overtook US in terms of FDIs. And there is a strange phenomenon about Hong Kong also. Investments in Hong Kong almost doubled last year at the time that China appeared to have been tightening its grips in Hong Kong. Again, there are a lot of Hong Kong to Africa investments. Many people investing out of China may want to look at it from Hong Kong. So again, these are things you ought to be interested in. I was going to US.
Before that, again, another question on China. There's a view that China has slowed down some of its work in Africa. Now I'll come to Africa. But could the RCEP be the reason? Because I know, for example, even in Ghana, we were expecting Sino-Hydro to come on board, it slowed down. And from our scanning in our news, we realized that it's not just Ghana. I don't know whether it's the president's own view to satisfy more internal forces, but China seems to be, I won't say pulling out, but essentially slowing down on the pace. If you compare this to like 6-7 years ago of what they were doing in Africa.
I think you need to look at China from a strategic lens at each point in time. And the fact that they try to maintain stability is very important to them. Stability is quite important to them, and they are not a liberal democracy economy. It's a one country, two systems type of economy. So the drive or the slowdown, as you put it, is across the world. It's not just...
So it's not just Africa?
No, it's not just Africa.
Okay.
It appears to have stemmed from some of the challenges they have faced on the Belt and Road Initiative project, which was expected to spend $1 trillion and also because of his own slowdown following the pandemic. But again, they are one country who seem to have recovered much more quickly than many other countries. What I do believe, is that they will come back on the investment, except in Africa's case. The problem with Africa's case is that there is a high level of indebtedness for many of the countries. So you have the challenge between the ability to pay the debt back and China's own internal challenges as to its ability to want to spend money. And then there's one factor that you must look at. China wants to avoid collapse of major economic sectors. Evergrande is an issue. If you've been following Evergrande, they defaulted on one occasion. It's the largest real estate firm in the world, worth about $300 billion if my data is right. They defaulted in paying one of their debts which were due. The government has not come out to announce saving them, but somehow they are beginning to, start operating again. If you have the kind of collapse that you had in the Enron in the US or the subprime mortgages challenges in 2008, 2009 in China, the story is going to be different. So I think all these factors come together in what we are calling a slowdown of investment, but they really have not slowed down. They are still investing heavily in many African countries.
What is your view on US? What's happening there now?
I think Biden will have many more problems than maybe he originally envisaged, so to speak. One is internal. Don't dismiss a Trump comeback. Definitely not in 2022, but by a Trump comeback, with Trump lacking in the corner and with midterm elections happening in November, it creates a lot of challenges internally for him to deal with. And then you have the pandemic that he has to deal with as well. Then you have the situation where they have to now deal with a lot of their international challenges. Ukraine and Russia is the major one that he has to deal with. And you have the situation where America seems to have a position slightly different from that of NATO. And Russia massing troops on the border and demanding that NATO should not go into Ukraine, and each taking a very entrenched position. The talks are going on. So you have to deal with that as well. And a few other international issues which will emerge. Biden, as you notice, wanted to reassert America's leadership of the world, which
Trump was not so interested in.
Yeah, so he has a number of issues to deal with. In an election year, he may change some of his policies. Notice that some of his advisors during the transition have even issued some, as it were, letters to him regarding how he treats the COVID pandemic. And if you read in between the lines, elections are all part of the reasons why these things will happen. So I'm not so sure when it comes to Africa that there will be much attention to Africa. The U.S. IFC, which was the $63 billion promised a few years ago, I'm not so sure to what extent the rollout is. AGOA has dropped in terms of, the amount of trade, and then recently America has removed some countries from AGOA itself, which will made likely to affect the volume of trade in AGOA.
But with Biden's posture on Russia, last week, Biden told the Ukrainian president that the U.S. will respond decisively if Russia further invades. So that suggests that Trump didn't really want to meddle in the Balkans in terms of Russia versus Ukraine.
Or he didn't want to confront Putin, probably.
That's the point, because of his own background. Biden has sent a very clear message, and this is a CNN story, that Biden told Ukrainian President Zelensky on Sunday, this is just January 3, that the U.S. and its allies will respond decisively if Russia further invades Ukraine. Now, the two of them spoke after Biden urged Russian President Putin to ease an unremitting military crisis on Ukraine's border. So what do you expect Russia's response to be, and what does all that thing mean for us? Because for a few years, the Russia situation with Ukraine has been volatile, but we've known that because America wasn't very interested in dealing with that, the Russia sort of had a free hand. But now that Biden is saying that we're not going to allow Russia to invade Ukraine, you said it means for Africa there's going to be a withdrawal, but again, it suggests
not a withdrawal. You will not occupy top of the agenda.
Well, we've never had.
Well, but at least you will not be so important
Yeah.
in terms of things to deal with or this desk. That's how I see it. So I don't expect a third world war.
You don't expect it to lead to war?
Yes, I don't expect a third world war. There will be a lot of posturing.
You don't expect Putin to defy Biden?
I think Putin is he's already taking his strategy to amass. I mean, to mass have that number of troops on the border. Simply, is a situation where you are signaling what you want to do. Maybe it's a strategy to simply get America to come to the table.
We'll see. There's an interesting analysis. This is the point of view. We're trying to look into the crystal ball for 2022, global issues. A couple of points David Fosu-Dorte, my guest, has made. Generally speaking, in Europe, it's more about France and their election. The fact that Germany, for the first decade and a half, have a new leader in place of Angela Merkel. That's the key issue to look at in Europe. In the eastern part of the world, in China and co, is the RCEP, the Regional Economic Partnership Agreement. And for the first time, China and Japan belonging to the same trade bloc. And what that means, that's 30% of the world's GDP right there. Then for the US, the fact that it's no longer America first necessarily with Biden, what all of that means. We'll take a short break.
And probably just before that, we should add for Europe the effects of the post-Brexit era.
Yes, that we haven't touched on as well. When we come back, we'll try and come closer home with the three pillars is pointed. Because to be fair, the world is really Europe, Asia, if like China and US. Those are the three growing power blocks. South America and Africa and the rest of us sort of play second fiddle in that sense. So having set these coordinates, what should we expect on the African continent? Is the after slowing down? Are we losing steam? What has happened since all the talk? Has COVID destroyed the after momentum? All right? There are some big elections on the African continent. Kenya looks a very serious issue. What's happening in South Africa as well? Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight is still on the preview. We're looking into 2022 from a global geopolitical perspective. My guest is the founding partner of AB and David. It's a Pan-African law firm with presence in at least 7 countries and with relationships in over 24. And every year he does the crystal ball. He'll do it later in the year in February. But today we're just trying to have a cursory look at what type of world it will be in 2022. So David, let's talk about the African continent. You said a few things about Turkey, which I'll come back to later. But I thought there was a lot of noise about after pre-COVID. And I feel the after, and this is purely from my external point of view, I feel the after momentum has flattened a bit. That's what I feel. I don't know what you think.
It hasn't. It is the rules of origin which has not been published yet. But if my information is right, I think this month, the Secretary General may be releasing a publication on that and other related matters. Again, if my information is right, I don't work at the After Secretariat. But I think there is an antecedent to that. The original start date of July 1, 2020, which was pushed to 2021, I think to some extent made people feel that the tempo had slowed down. And then, of course, you have COVID. And when COVID takes so much attention, vaccine apartheid, and all those kind of things. So a lot is happening at the afterfront. A lot of people are preparing.
Really? Yes, because African Business wrote an article, and they were basically asking, is after losing momentum. And they give 3 reasons. The first is what you mentioned, the never-ending discussion on the rules of origin, which is really stalling things. Then it mentions the interference of external partners pushing the agenda of divide and rule. For example, give an example of Kenya's free trade deal with US. And then they also talk about the pandemic and how it sort of slowed down the work of the Secretariat. So I don't know what you think.
Well, I don't think we shouldn't single out Kenya's free trade. Ghana has signed a trade agreement with the UK. Kenya has signed one with US. I think Mauritius with India. A number of these ones, so it is African tendency not to be able to stick to the course of what it decides to do collectively. So, but it has not destroyed the AFCFTA or the AFTA itself. Its advantages are there. And I think what you should be looking at more, it's not what the politicians are doing, but what the businesses are doing. And you should also be looking at what countries who are strategizing are doing. For example, Gabon publicly launched this strategy drive for AFTA. There are many countries who are doing that. So I would rather focus on that. Yes, I do agree that if we had the rules of origin completed by now, the story would probably have been different. But there's another thing we must talk about, which has to do with the impact of the pandemic. A lot of countries have their borders closed. Now, you don't have free trade and free movement when borders are closed. And I'm one of the advocates that we must open, the borders. After all, we've opened our airports. And I'm not talking about Ghana, I'm talking about across Africa. And the Asian bloc, the RCEP, is trading across the borders. The goods from China to Indonesia went by train.
Meanwhile, COVID was probably more serious there than it was in Africa.
So these are things we ought to consider. And I do think that it will pick up if the businesses drive it. Yeah.
So you agree the border should be open. But our border has been closed since March 20 or something. 2020. That's crazy.
That's what I'm saying. It's an ECOWAS issue.
Yeah.
And it's an issue across the rest of Africa. And it is something we need to look at its impact on the after. One of the sad things that will happen is that we are likely to have data which will indicate that as a result of the pandemic, we have dropped from the 18% intra-Africa trade we reached by 2018 as a result of the pandemic. And unless we open the borders and let these things be revamped and begin to take more account of the informal trade across the borders, we are going to have challenges. I'm also not ruling out the quote-unquote undermining, as you indicated, I talked about, countries signing individual agreements. But for that, I blame the African countries. If for everything we have to rely on external partners, even to fund the secretariat, to some extent, it becomes possible if somebody, quote-unquote, want to undermine you. It's not overt. There's a suspicion people may have, but I think African countries must learn to put their money.
Which African countries are critical when it comes not just to AFTA, but for the continent's re-emergence?
I think Ethiopia, by far, was doing extremely well, if you ask me. And the factors I used to assess this, Ethiopia was totally outstanding in terms of it being able to bring the cost of power to industry down, to way around the tariff that could drive industrialization, in terms of it becoming faster manufacturing hub. Incidentally, their manufacturing hub drive has been largely facilitated by China. The number of special economic zones that they rolled out and the number of goods that they were churning out. And I thought Ethiopia was getting it right and driving the kind of economy which is not likely to be dependent on so much on imports but on exports. Incidentally, the war from the Tigray region came from nowhere, which some people suspect is driven by external forces. But if you know Ethiopia's history, it is resilient. It's the only African country which was never colonized. It defeated they've had many problems, yes, from Djibouti to Eritrea, now to Tigray. But I do think Ethiopia will once again survive. I think so.
So
my own prediction is that
setting the pace in manufacturing, you think Ethiopia sets the right signal prior to the conflict?
South Africa is in a class of its own when it comes to
because of its unique history.
But in terms of African countries which were doing the right thing, that would take them out of the cycle of every 10-year cycle, IMF and things like that. I thought Ethiopia was doing
very well.
Very well. Of course, the likes of Morocco, Egypt are also doing quite well, and probably Kenya and then Ghana, if you want to look at the big boys on the continent.
You haven't mentioned Nigeria, which I find
yes, Nigeria. But again,
what is your view on Nigeria? It's the largest country by population on the continent, the largest member of ECOWAS, Ghana's sort of historical partner,
and the largest economy.
Yeah, overtaking South Africa. What is the verdict on them economically and politically? They don't seem to be taking the lead as much. Is it the I don't know.
you know, you have to take each country in terms of its internal, at the end of the day, all politics is domestic. In terms of its internal politics, as well as how that politics affect, the rest of the continent. And I think Nigeria's internal politics is part of the problem. And for 2022, one of the things to watch, from Nigeria, is inflation, IMF role in Nigeria, and probably Buhari becoming a lame duck towards the end of the year. Because remember,
when is their next election?
2023.
Ooh.
Yes. So the fight for the succession will be very intense from the second half of the year going.
So from the second half of 2022, the battle for post-Buhari.
Exactly.
And we've already heard that a group of northern governors have come together to say they reject the proposal from some southern governors that power must revert back to the south.
Some of the candidates started campaigning in 2020, that early. So that's one aspect of Nigeria. The second aspect of Nigeria is that notwithstanding its diversification of the economic attempt, it is largely dominated by oil.
Still.
So as oil prices are beginning to rise, it may help the economy stabilize. But again, I must give this to Nigeria. Their businesses are much more after-driven than most African businesses. So forget about government. Let's deal with the business.
So Nigerian businesses are
very
pro-African.
Yes, very after-driven. Just look around the number of Nigerian banks here.
Yes.
So, and they, as it were, spread across the continent pre-after.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of advantage to be able to ride on the back of their banks, even their churches.
Yes.
across the continent, and their dominance can be massive if they get it right. Others, if they get their internal politics right.
Have you analyzed Nigeria versus South Africa in terms of the success of their businesses on the continent? A friend of mine was saying that it's a very interesting thing to study because South Africans also initially, from ShopRite to Pep stores and all of those, before their banks also started coming in. So there seems to be some competition there as to their footprint on the African continent, on the finance, and then on the retail side.
I think there are two different approaches. The Nigerian businesses they have not had the type of approach to business that the South Africans have had, because remember, for a very long time, the South Africans were outside African economy. And then once South Africa got independent, their drive for the northern invasion, as it were, moved up. But if you look at how they measure profitability and the indices they use, which is very similar to what you find in the West, the typical sub-Saharan African use similar indices, but not the same drive.
I get it.
So you find that a few South African companies, once they don't meet certain standards,
they withdraw.
They fold up.
They don't seem to have the patience for the long haul.
Exactly.
The Nigerians understand the way the Africa. So they are a bit like Chinese. Compared to Americans.
Exactly.
They know how to do business in other African countries because they know it's not very formal.
That's the point I'm making, that if they get their internal politics right, they are really the ones who are likely to dominate the after.
You think so? Even though initially they were a bit slow on the political side. So if you look at their businesses more than their politics.
They were one of the last countries to come on board just before the inauguration, I think in July in Niger. But I think my own intelligence is that they were preparing and they were just posturing.
Even their Benin border closure and all that.
The Benin border closure has worked, quote and unquote, to the advantage. If the rules of origin is to operate as it is, they are one country who can, for example, put rice in a special class because the amount of rice imported there has gone significantly down. Whilst Ghana, as an example, may not be able to do that because it is not a question of just local production, but whether you are also importing a significant amount of good you declassify.
So you're basically saying that the AFTA hasn't lost momentum. It will work on the business side after things are happening, and post-pandemic, we should expect more activity on AFTA.
Let me put it this way. I would rather hope than lose hope. It's the only thing we have from the business perspective if we lose it. But whether, quote and unquote, it loses momentum or not, my emphasis on the African businessman, and I have made this point on several fora, intra-Africa trade got to 18% before AFTA. So the Africans are already trading.
Okay.
What is important is for the borders to be opened and for free movement to be encouraged and for the informal sector trade to be taken account of, because a lot of informal sector trade is not being accounted for. So probably we are having more intra-African trade than we are accounting for. And if we do that, and if we draw attention of people to the larger market, we are likely to have,
we are having this discussion whilst the AFCON is going on. And a quick anecdote. So one of the things happening in the AFCON was that before the tournament, Roger Miller said some things about the North Africans, that basically they...
Oh, I missed that then.
Yes, you're not a football man, but a week to the tournament, he said that the North Africans should give us a break, that if they don't want to be part of Africa, they should let us know. Because on one hand, they play with the Arabs, and on the other hand, they want to come and play down south. So the Arabs the North Africans are not very happy with Roger Miller. But the point is that they are very committed to the AFCON. Using that as an entry point, when you look into North Africa, what do you see? Is there some sort of fight between Morocco and Egypt for dominance? Which North African country should we, in partnerships and in investment, should we be looking at more closely from a Ghana or Sub-Saharan African perspective?
I will not single out any. Morocco, in terms of my analysis, I will pick Morocco first. And that is an interesting history when it comes to Africa. It once left the AU and then came back to the AU and then applied to join the ECOWAS. I mean, it's at the tip of West Africa, and so applied to join ECOWAS, which will have been an economic advantage because it's a very well-organized economy and they are doing quite well. And again, in terms of, whilst I talked about Ethiopia organizing its economy in order to come out of the cycle, Morocco is far advanced, especially when it comes to the automotive industry. Morocco is already exporting a lot of inputs in the automotive industry, and that economy is well organized. The likes of Banque Populaire and the rest are trying to go across the continent, hopefully, just like the South African banks and the rest have done and the Nigerian banks have done. So it's one country to watch. But the size of Morocco's economy is not the same size as Egypt's economy. I will pick Egypt as the next, building a new capital. I think Egypt is an exciting economy, and you have a lot of Egyptian investors who are looking down south, sub-Saharan Africa. And they have done it much, much longer than the Moroccans. So I think in terms of the ability to go across the continent, Egypt may be ahead of Morocco, but Morocco may end up becoming a financial center.
But those will be your top two in the north.
Yes, and then Tunisia, Algeria. Algeria, of course, because of its ability to export a large amount of gas to Europe, is a significant economy, but I'll pick those two.
They don't seem to have much of an appetite for sub-Saharan African investments as the other two.
So. Yes.
So it's Morocco and Egypt. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Let's go to the east of Africa. I know you did some work with some friends in East Africa. Is Kenya the obvious leading economy
by far
in East Africa?
By far. But the other country to watch is Uganda, simply because of what is called the UNOC. The Uganda found oil, which is onshore. And then they decided that it will be an East African project. So they are building one of the longest pipelines across Kenya to Tanzania, etc. And once you have a project like that, and the country begins to integrate its economy, and Uganda is significant when it comes to also agriculture and food production. So it's a country to watch. I'm not so sure to what extent Museveni, after well over 30 years in power, would want to do much more reform. But Kenya, yes. The other interesting thing about Kenya has to do with something else probably we need to talk about. The number of transatlantic fiber that will be landing on the continent most likely this year. Expect it in Ghana, Nigeria, and Mombasa. And these three will transform the rate at which we are able to communicate with the world, the rate of digitization, and the growth of IT firms on the continent. It's very clear why the likes of Twitter, Google, and the rest are all looking at the continent. Perhaps if there is one bright spot Africa should be looking at, it may be in the entire sector of IT as a whole. Now, remember now, Kenya also produces oil. So if you have IT, already a large economy, and having integration, much greater integration on the continent. If the election in Kenya goes right, which is something we need to talk about.
I'm coming there.
Okay. If the election in Kenya goes right and there is
as in there's no conflict and there's no repeat of what happened with the
previously. Exactly, that's what I mean.
So not necessarily who wins.
No. Even though
I'm coming back to let's do Kenya a bit. So a little of what I know, it seems as if Uhuru's number 2, Ruto, has been sort of left in the lurch because there seems to be a lot of coziness between Uhuru and Odinga. And we know that Ruto, who's the vice president, is interested in running. But we know that Kenyan politics is very, how shall I say?
Kikuyu and
tribal.
Yeah.
So with Uhuru's posture, it seems as if there is a lot of uncertainty about the chess game that's being played, who's going to join forces with who and what that's going to mean. What do you know about that?
I think, I don't remember the way they wanted to pass a legislation that really would have made it a no contest, but somehow that didn't happen. I think there was a court action and that was stopped. As a Ghanaian, what is happening looks to me almost exactly what happened in the late 90s in Ghana between Aka and J.J. Rawlings, if you remember, where the sitting president had a deputy who was running against him with President Kufuor. That was 96, with President Kufuor's ticket and
that's the kind of situation we have. So the president and the vice are not on very good terms.
It's very clear that the president and the vice are not on good terms, and that even a large part of the Jubilee party, which is the president party, seems to be against the vice president. At least I have watched a few clips of the chairman of the party holding press conferences, and I think some letters about allegations of corruption against the vice president and all that. So you may have a situation where the president and a certain part of the party may end up voting for Raila. So don't rule out the possibility that the Jubilee party may split, because remember, Ruto also has his support. And I'm not so sure to what extent the tribal element will play, but if the tribal element plays in Kenya, then you are likely to have a split in the party.
What is Uhuru's thinking? Why is he, again, from what I see, he seems very cozy with
Raila.
Yes, which is like his rival in a way, but it's almost like he's going to make peace with his greatest rival.
He called him his brother.
Yes.
And
for viewers who don't know this, so both men have fathers. So there's an incident. It's almost like Kwame Nkrumah and J.B. Dankwa's sons, who are now leading a country, where Raila's father and Uhuru's father were both very significant in Kenya's original history. So, and we know that Raila Odinga is almost like the main Luo face. He's a chief as well, highly respected. He's in fact treated like the president. I mean, I was on a program where he was almost being addressed like a president, even though he was
he's a former prime minister.
Yes.
And remember, he's the AU's High Commissioner for Infrastructure.
Yeah.
So he has the title Excellency in both ways,
But does Kenya's future depend economically on who wins? Or because there are some countries where whoever wins, we know that there's continuity.
I think that's why I said I'm hoping the election and the post-election era goes right. Kenya is one country where systems largely work better than a lot of other African countries, aside South Africa. So, and there is a fair bit of meritocracy. If there is one thing I think you can say for Uhuru, to some extent, he has managed to allow meritocracy to work, especially in parts of the civil service, unlike many African countries. So, I do believe that irrespective of who wins, if there is no violence and we don't go back to the past, the economy will continue to grow.
Quick side note on Tanzania. Magufuli died 2021. Is that a setback? Is the country, because we know his posture towards COVID, his vice, who's now the president, seems to be more open to the rest of the world. What's your quick view on Tanzania?
It depends on how you view what to take each African country or Africa as a collective out of the cycle of poverty.
Okay.
Magufuli appeared to have been on a path similar to that of Ethiopia. I don't think the vice has really changed much other than the COVID issue, which I mean, we all know what happened. Probably they will stick to the path largely.
We'll take a short break. This is the point of view. We're trying to look into the crystal ball for 2022. We set the coordinates for the world. We've spoken about Africa at length. We'll try and tie up the loose ends when we come back. A few issues in West Africa and possibly even the business community in Ghana as well. All this whole conversation about Guta versus AGI and all of that. Where does my guest stand? Stay with us. Welcome to Back to the Point of View. Tonight we're doing our second preview show in the year. First one was on politics. This one is global geopolitics and business. My guest, David Ofosu-Dorte, who's the founder and lead at AB and David, a Pan-African law firm. So David, we've spoken about Africa and everything else. West Africa, I interviewed Ambassador DK Osei, I think 4 months ago, and he was not very optimistic about the continent, sub-region, because he was basically saying, apart from Ghana, there's a lot of uncertainty in most of the countries. Cote d'Ivoire was one of the places where we're all very optimistic. Now the guy is going for a third term. Bagbo is out of prison. He's also back. What's your quick comment on West Africa? And now President Akufo-Addo is almost like the leading figure in terms of trying to bring the whole place together. They are trying to sanction Mali and all of that. What do you make of the sub-region?
It's always been, remember this used to be the hotbed of coups. Essentially, I think we started it, if my history of coups is right, from Yasimbe, even before...
I think we did it, then they started copying us.
Yes.
We did 66 and everybody...
I thought they did it
first
and we did it.
But then from us, Nigeria, everybody else followed suit.
So I mean, the West Africa has been the hotbed of coups. I mean, on the lighter side, when the Mugabe was being removed and they didn't know whether they were removing him or etc., the West Africans used to say, hey, we know how to do coups better. I mean, so, but remember, we have had Guinea and Mali.
Yes.
And so it's not, and if I move out of West Africa, come back with Sudan, one of the questions I've been asking myself is whether coup is becoming fashion again. But coming back to West Africa, with the trouble in Mali, Burkina Faso, and I'm talking about the is it insurgents? How do you call them?
Insurgency in Burkina Faso.
And all that. Don't rule out disturbance in the region. I still think Ghana will remain, as it were, an oasis of peace. And probably Benin and Togo as well. Nigeria, the same Boko Haram thing will continue happening every now and then. But I'm not so sure whether the sanctions by ECOWAS is going to change the attitude of the Malians or going to change anything in Guinea. I think these guys are going to stick to their guns. The problem, I think, also is that part of this is caused by foreign interference around that region. So it keeps making this part of the world unstable.
What about Ghana? We've just seen some sort of U-turn. It's almost like Guta and AGI have drawn the line.
The benchmark value?
Yes, and I don't know what that portends for other economic policies, because the government was quite clear it wanted to...
A reversal.
Yes, but from the noise Guta made and the port forces came together, now AGI seems to have been defeated temporarily. What signals does that send about business policy decisions for this government for the next few months?
I happen to have chaired an event or moderated an event where the senior advisor to the president was my guest. So I was in your seat, so to speak.
And you were asking questions?
Yes, I was asking questions. And I posed this same question to him. And this was at the moving pick, if I recall, and there was Guta and AGI. And I thought it was a simple problem. Then I saw a long queue of about 18 to 20 people each trying to make a contribution. By the time I finished, I mean, I realized that issue. It was difficult for the government to make a decision either way. It is a very massive issue. What I agree with the president is the need for broader consultation. What I recommend is that there should be a definite timeline for this issue to be resolved. Either way, it affects industrialization or it affects the cost of goods that people buy.
So we have to decide what we want, because we all, in the long term, want AGI and our manufacturing to be strong.
Exactly.
But in the short term, when things get too expensive, it affects everybody because we are still import-driven. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, and I think one of the things the government needs to do in making that decision is to coordinate it with other things and the total impact. So that's where it is. But in Ghana and in Nigeria also, be looking out for inflation. There's a possibility of inflation in 2020 22, and that's part of the things that may e-levy will come back once Parliament resumes.
The way our Parliament is, how do you see that affecting economic governance? How close it is and how difficult it is to arrive at decisions? Will that be a setback economically for the country?
It depends on whether the e-levy and other parts of the appropriations are passed or not. But in terms of the tight, split in Parliament, is difficult to predict which way it will go. But I think that the government may have to be putting on its other caps in the unlikely event, or let me put it in the event that is not passed. But even if it is passed, I'm yet to see any major economic policy that has achieved 100% of its goals. So you are likely not to achieve the full target, and therefore you may need to be looking at, other ways.
Maybe another time I'll invite you to look at what's going to happen on the political side in Ghana later, not today. Because, of course, in Ghana, we also have a succession battle in a way, in the leading, the governing party with the succession of Nana Addo and then the NDC as well. But we'll touch on that on a different day. Thank you for being on the show. My guest has been David Ofosu-Dorte, he's not looked fully into the crystal ball. He's just sprinkled some few things and said a few things. He will do the full one in February. Hope to get him back then to talk about where the world will be. But thank you, David. Thank you for watching. My name is Ben Adavle. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
The Point of View is brought to you by Cowbell Coffee. Cowbell Coffee. Taste it, love it. Kel Charcoal Toothpaste. Kel Charcoal. Happy smile. Bell Aqua Active. Bell Aqua Active. Stay true to originality.